Deliver us from evil and the dumbest bill in America, except this podcast. We don't have a dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Deliver Us from Evil. As you know, that term is actually in the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil. We are using that term because I think this is a great time in world history when the human race could be delivered from evil. Wouldn't that be nice? And we are saying this because of all of the things that we are seeing in Afghanistan in particular. Other areas too. We'll talk about those other areas as well. But first up, Bill Maher, one of our favorite comedians. He's certainly not my favorite comedian, but one of my favorite comedians because of the fact that he actually makes fun of people on both sides. No doubt Bill Maher, as we've said before, is on the left. Without question, he's on the left. He is a left-centered comedian. I mean, he, generally speaking, does not like Republicans, and it's pretty clear. He makes fun of them. But he also, over the course of the cancel culture, over the number of years, he's been making fun of them as well, and really roasting them on his show. And so Bill Maher has a segment where he's talking about blind hatred of America and how it's stupid. To blindly hate this country is just stupid. And he comes up with a lot of examples, but he does so by bringing in Afghanistan. And he does the kind of compare and contrast between Afghanistan and United States of America, and talks about how it's so stupid to blame America for everything and how America, it should be hated. It should be canceled. Everything about it should be revoked, suspended, changed. And he kind of puts the cautionary tale on there on why that should be the case. And then we're going to also tie into that the Babylon Bee that comes up with a new Babylon Bee about AOC and Afghanistan. It's really funny. And tie this into the whole Bill Maher segment. And so first up, Bill Maher is talking about how we should stop complaining about America as the oppressor, right? We constantly hear this. I hear this all the time, by the way. People will send me emails. People will call me. Sometimes it's just conversation at parties and so forth. And, oh, America is a terrible country. It's just awful. And by the way, increasingly, this is being taught in public schools and sometimes some private schools too. Certainly it's being taught in colleges, which is where all this started. It started in college about how America is such an awful place and therefore it must be canceled. And everything about America must be canceled. So Bill Maher talks about just that, this cancel culture and how it is trying to ruin the United States by saying we are an oppressor and that's all we know, that's all we're capable of. Clearly, that is not showing itself in Afghanistan for a variety of reasons. So first up, here's Bill Maher talking about America as oppressor in his upcoming segment. We're going to play that and then kind of build upon that with other segments from him and clips. Here it is.
And finally, new rule, blind hatred of America is just as blinkered as blind love. And we Americans should really get some perspective about where we live. Watching the shit go down in Afghanistan, I was reminded lately of every conversation I've ever had with an immigrant, almost all of which, if we got to really talking, included the notion, oh, you people have no idea. All you do is bitch about and badmouth your own country, but if you knew about the country I came from, you'd stop shitting on your own.
And that's so true, of course, because I have a friend, as all of us have, these types of friends, but I have one in particular. He's a wonderful person. He's from Eastern Europe and lived there during the Russian Empire, or, the communist government of Russia controlled all of Eastern Europe, and they were all client states of the Russian Communist Party. And that was a time when this gentleman lived there. And he just told me so many stories about the oppression and how you would read in the newspapers in his country, how there was a record crop of wheat and a record crop of corn and just, things were going so well in the country. And then you would go to the store and there would be no bread on the shelves. And there would be a lack of all products needed in order to survive, or at least to live a relatively decent life. and you'd have to wait in lines. You have to wait in a line that was many hours long just to get a half a loaf of bread if you were lucky. And so he would talk about this. Is we take that stuff for granted, that you go to, of course, the Safeway, or you go to Kroger, or whatever your store is, Winn-Dixie, I don't really know. There's so many of them across the United States. And you walk in and you make the assumption that everything that you want is going to be there. Except, of course, during COVID when there was no toilet paper. And that was why no toilet paper? Why wasn't there a run on the bread, and why wasn't there a run on like regular food and things that last for a long time, like, because nuts can last like 10 years, like walnuts and pecans and stuff like that. But why not? Oh no, toilet paper is what wasn't there. But that kind of tells you a little bit. Imagine having that in Eastern Europe, and that's the way it is. That's the way it was during the communist occupation of Eastern Europe. Imagine that's the way it was all the time. You really didn't have the products that you needed in order to live a successful life and a comfortable life, let alone a healthy life. Well, that's what Bill Maher talks about in this segment. Blind hatred of America is stupid because we take so many of things in our lives for granted, such as the grocery store being full of food when we walk in. And the idea that, gee, all I have to do now is find a job and I can buy those groceries. Of course, unless Biden stays in office much longer and you're going to have inflation so high that you won't be able to, but I digress. So then Bill Maher talks about, well, here's real repression. Okay, cancel culture warriors in the United States. Okay, America haters. You want to talk about real repression? Let's talk about it. Here's Bill Maher talking about just that.
I'm sorry your professor said something you didn't like. That won't be a problem with the Taliban because you're not allowed to go to school. In Saudi Arabia, grown women can be jailed for doing the kind of things we think of as routine without the permission of a male guardian. China rounds you up if you're the wrong religion and puts you in camps. More children in Burkina Faso work than are in school. Only 5% of Burundians have electricity. The homicide rate in Honduras is 8 times what it is here. The inflation rate in Venezuela is 2,719%. The Philippines, in the last 5 years, has put to death 27,000 low-level drug dealers. My old job. In North Korea, people starve to death. The only people who starve here are doing it for a role. And the only people who have no water live in California.
Yeah, well, that's true. The only people that have no water happen to be the lefties in California because they haven't figured out how to desalinate ocean water so that they can have plenty of water or other kinds of solutions, let alone the fact that they don't have enough electricity in California for very similar reasons, namely that they don't want to build more reliable plants that actually produce baseload power, as we've talked about many times. But that's Bill Maher talking about real repression across the world. Imagine living in Venezuela where the inflation rate is above 2,000%. Imagine that. Now, of course, if you're Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, you can certainly imagine that, which is why you want to spend $4.5 trillion and borrow all that money and add to the United States debt, thus causing even more inflation, which we're already seeing in gas and food prices, just to name a few places, new car and used car prices, housing prices, we can just go on and on. But real repression exists in places where you don't even have the right to buy anything or any of those things. You have to have the correct religion. If you break the law, such as they see it, you are executed for things such as practicing the wrong religion. Or in certain Muslim countries, many of them at least, going to school at all, or not getting permission from your husband to go out in public, or dressing improperly, or just go on and on and on as he gave those examples. That's real repression. But here we are in the United States of America, and we have the cancel culture and the American haters telling us how bad they have it. And they're in college, many of them complaining about it. Mom and dad are paying for them in college to go there, and their food is made for them because they're on the food plan. They don't have to make their own food, and they show up and eat every day. Everything's done for them. Many of them have housekeeping services in their dorms, and they're complaining about how awful America is as you see what's unwinding in Afghanistan. And you think those individuals were probably watching that going, well, that's just an aberration. That's just one country. Yet it happens to be somewhat of the norm across the planet that human beings aren't treated very well and don't have the freedoms that we have in the United States, let alone have the opportunities that we have in the United States today. And so Bill Maher adds to this monologue of his, and it's very interesting because he really touches on something that I saw as well when I was watching the visual of the plane, the American planes on the tarmac at the Kabul airport. And there they are taxiing, and you have all these people trying to climb on the planes because they want to leave Afghanistan because they know the Taliban is coming back. And with the Taliban comes all of the bad stuff, all of the evil stuff, and all of the other visuals of American GIs trying to help people and trying to process them so they can leave Afghanistan and go somewhere else, pretty much anywhere else. And I'm sure many of them, their first choice, of course, would be the United States of America, which makes you wonder, how do we have so many America haters? And how do we have such an active cancel culture in the United States, a culture that wants to cancel the United States itself and our Constitution and our Bill of Rights if we have so many others who want to come here? So Bill Maher talks just about that. It's pretty interesting, especially for a liberal to be talking this way, because you don't hear hardly any liberals speaking this way, especially elected officials who are progressives and liberals. And you certainly don't hear comedians talking this way because it's not allowed in the comedy world. You cannot talk about this in the comedy world. You have to talk about only people on the right and how bad they are. Not Bill Maher, man. He takes them on and listen up. Here it is.
There's a reason Afghan mothers are handing their babies to us. Right. And we should take them. Americans right now should take in Afghan refugees into their homes and into their neighborhoods. And I'm sure everyone who just clapped is thinking the same thing. Yes, someone who isn't me should definitely do that.
Yeah, somebody else should definitely do that, just not me. I think that's pretty accurate because that's especially accurate on the liberal side of the aisle, where it's, oh my gosh, we should let as many Afghans into the United States as possible, as long as they don't live next to me, as long as they don't live with me. And I think that's a very common thing and a very common theme among liberals in particular. And I think you will find that most of the charity organizations that are going to ultimately help, by charity, I mean true charity organizations, not government organizations or quasi-government organizations, but true charity organizations that are going to be helping are going to be probably Christian churches. That's my guess. And it doesn't work, though, that you have so many people who want to come here and at the same time say, as a progressive, that America is awful and I hate America and that this is such a bad place. And so this goes back to that visual that I was talking about right before you heard that clip from Bill Maher. And that is, yes, there are people on the tarmac. They're trying to climb the plane. They're trying to get on the plane. But how about mothers? How about the mothers in Afghanistan? The most important thing to every mother and to every father is their children. And that's universal no matter where you live on the planet. That is the most important thing in your life. It's always yourself first, right? That seems to be uniquely human. It's very human nature, part of human nature to think about yourself first until such time as you have a child. And then that child or your children, if you have multiple, more than one child, your children become everything. They come before you. That is what a good parent does. You always put them first. And what you never want to do is to put them in harm. And so then we have this visual of Afghani women literally handing their children, some of them infants, some of them toddlers, some older, to American GIs and saying, please, I know I can't go now, or I can't go at all. I can't leave this country now because I'm not allowed to, at least not at this time, but please at least take my children. No parent would willingly do that ever unless they feared for their lives and feared for the lives of their children and really truly wanted what was best for their children, which is an opportunity not just at survival, but an opportunity at a better life. And that is why America is truly and remains truly the shining city on a hill, as Ronald Reagan said. We are the shining city on a hill because imagine any other military in any other similar situation where mothers would willingly hand their children to the folks in charge of the military and the soldiers in the military. Do you think, for example, for 1 minute that any mother would hand their child to the Chinese military, which is like handing them to the Chinese communists? Do you think that's what their choice would be? Oh, I don't want my child to live here. I want my child to live in communist China. Oh, I don't want my child to live here. I want them to live in Venezuela. I want my child to live in North Korea. I want my child to live in Cuba. I want my child to live in any number of incredibly impoverished and unsafe African countries. That just doesn't happen, but it does happen with the United States of America. And it seems like it only happens with the United States of America. And maybe that comes with, in part, being a superpower. But you know what? This is a superpower that has a heart, because you see these other pictures of American GIs who are actually joking with and kidding with and kind of are surrogate parents to children. You see them interacting with the children. This is early on in the evacuation process where they're talking to the children, and this is before things got super desperate, and they're kidding with them. They're giving them some of their food, the GIs are. They're giving them some of the candy that they probably have. Maybe it was sent to them by their wives or by their own parents. And you see this and you think to yourself, what an exceptional country this place is where we live. We live in such an exceptional country. And here we are. We're the country that is delivering from evil Afghan refugees and children that mothers are willingly giving away. And there's no other place on earth, no other people on earth, no other government on earth that would do what we do and that would engage in this kind of activity. And that's why we are exceptional. And do you hear anything from AOC? Does anyone out there hear anything from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez about this matter? Is AOC talking about America as an exceptional country? Is she talking about how Afghan mothers are willingly giving up their babies to American GIs so they can live in freedom and safety and have opportunities and freedom of religion and freedom of movement? I mean, all the things that the cancel culture apparently wants to get rid of. And she's like the queen bee of cancel culture. And speaking of which, the Babylon Bee makes fun of her like crazy on this issue. So the Babylon Bee's latest, AOC, which of course stands for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC goes to Afghanistan to warn refugees not to come to oppressive, racist America. That's the title of the story. And of course, this is satire, which is what makes them so daggone funny. And the story goes like this. Oh no, like, what are they doing? Shrieked AOC at her TV screen. Don't they know America is full of systemic oppression? I need to go save them right now. She's referring to, of course, Afghanistan. AOC then picked up her top secret squad phone. Get the squad together, she said. We have brown people to save. Of course, Afghanis are really white. She then assembled the squad in her secret squad jet and flew behind enemy lines to warn the Afghans to stay out of America before it was too late. Salam alaikum, my fellow austere religious BIPOCs, she cried through a bullhorn. Don't come to America. It's a trap. There are microaggressions and racism everywhere, and white people appropriating your culture. Please stay here where you'll be safe and your human rights will be respected. She then ran over to the nearest aircraft and tried to slash the tires, but failed due to her being small and weak and having no upper body strength. The Taliban then threw her in prison for being outside without a man, which is pretty darn accurate. And again, this is satire. The rest of the squad has petitioned Joe Biden to send in the military to rescue AOC, but so far have been unable to wake Biden up from his nap. And that's the Babylon Bee's latest. AOC goes to Afghanistan to warn refugees not to come to oppressive, racist America. And that's exactly what Bill Maher is talking about. These idiots like AOC and the squad and everybody that supports her and thinks that that's okay to try to cancel America because it's a place of racism and hatred and oppression and systemic racism. I mean, we can't possibly bring people here, yet guess what? At least half of the planet would love to come here. And we're seeing this now with Afghanistan in real time, where mothers are handing their children to GIs. And so Bill Maher concludes this segment about Afghanistan and cancel culture and the haters of America by saying, what is the real lesson from Afghanistan? What is the real lesson? And he speaks about this very issue. We had that clip, and here it is.
Have you ever heard of honor killings, public beheadings, throwing gay men off of roofs, arranged marriages to minors, state-sanctioned wife beating, female genital mutilation, marriage by capture? Because we have. What's the lesson of Afghanistan? Maybe it's that everyone from the giant dorm room bitch session that is the internet should take a good look at what real oppression looks like. Ask your maid. Ask your Uber driver. Ask the Asian woman giving you a massage. She'll tell you this place is Shangri-La, and not just because she works in a place called Shangri-La. America may not be the country of your faculty lounge and Twitter dreams, but no one here tries to escape by hanging on to an airplane. No. We wait till we're inside the plane to fight. And then only because they cut off the beverage service.
That's Bill Maher, of course, making fun at the end of how Americans are fighting inside of planes, and has a photo of Americans literally punching each other inside of a plane that's airborne in the United States, and how bad our lives are. And meanwhile, comparing and contrasting that to Afghanistan, where people can't wait to leave the country because they have already lived before under the Taliban, and they know what that life is like. And it's a life not worth living. And in fact, it's a life that they may not be able to live because they will probably be tortured and killed if they don't remain on the plantation. And so Bill Maher did a terrific job to compare and contrast those who have blind hatred of America and the cancel culture with those people who are literally doing what I believe to be God's work in Afghanistan, namely the American military, in spite of the Biden administration not providing, as far as I'm concerned, any kind of plan or any kind of reasonable support to those individuals, but the American military. And it is the American military who is fulfilling that prayer, the Lord's Prayer, to deliver us from evil. They are delivering people literally from evil. And we can't save everyone, we know that, but we can certainly save some people. And I know that there are people out there in podcast land. This is important, by the way. I know there are people in podcast land on both sides of this issue, such as it relates to immigration of Afghanis. And I would agree with you, by the way, that we don't want to open our doors wide open and allow terrorists to intermingle with Afghani refugees. Okay. And that is my fear as well as yours, that some of those individuals will be terrorists because the Biden administration has done such a terrible job with this retreat from Afghanistan, and with this withdrawal, excuse me. But nonetheless, we do have an obligation to bring people to this country, I believe, who have helped the United States of America. And we have an obligation when a mother hands you her child and says, I know I may not see this child again, but please give them a great life. We have an obligation to deliver these people from evil. And that's exactly what we're doing. And the idea that anyone in this country would say that we are not an exceptional country, because after seeing that, after seeing those clips, after seeing the video, how could you ever say that we aren't different from every other country on earth? Because we are. We are different from every other country on earth. So get this, podcast listeners. The Virginia Education Department has instructed teachers to avoid teaching about Muslim extremism on 9/11. So as everyone knows, everyone who's lived through 9/11 knows that it was perpetrated by Muslim extremists, namely Muslim extremists who attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and brought down a plane in Pennsylvania. And so here's the article. Virginia's Department of Education hosted a speaker who instructed teachers to exclude the role Muslim extremism played when teaching students about 9/11. In a PowerPoint delivered by education leadership scholar Amara DeQueer, teachers were instructed to avoid using language that could pin the events of 9/11 on Muslim extremism. The lecturer pointed to the heightened anti-Muslim sentiment that allegedly ticks up around the anniversary of 9/11 attacks. Quote, school and classroom 9/11 commemorations are sites for increased anti-Muslim racism, the presentation reads. This year's 20th anniversary commemorations will likely result in heightened risks of racist discourse, threats, and violence targeting Muslim students in schools and society. Educators are well positioned to disrupt these risks by centering the socioeconomic and socio-emotional needs of Muslims in their commemoration plans. DeQueer created a list of teaching standards that are in and out according to her viewpoints. Teaching standards that are in include acknowledgement of anti-Muslim racism. Teaching standards that are out include false assumption of Muslim responsibility for 9/11 and American exceptionalism. In other words, American exceptionalism should not be taught. It's a bad thing to teach, and it is wrong to teach, according to DeQueer, the fact that 9/11 was perpetrated by individuals who were Muslim extremists. The presentation also listed examples of harmful teaching on 9/11. Examples included, quote, creating a tense classroom environment, reducing 9/11 instruction to death counts and fear-mongering, assumptions of emotional distance, teaching about Islam and or Muslims. You can't teach about Islam and Muslims, amplifying the extremists and extremist acts of 9/11, demanding the condemnation of 9/11, failing to respond to anti-Muslim racism, and reproducing a single American narrative that marginalizes other students. So in other words, the Virginia Department of Education is instructing its public schools to not teach the history of 9/11. Because if you were to teach the history of 9/11, you might offend some students in the classroom who happen to be Muslim or of Muslim descent. And that kind of misses the point, because the whole purpose of teaching about 9/11 is to teach children about Muslim extremism and how it happened and how we were looking the other way. And as a result, we were attacked and many people were killed, including, by the way, Americans who happen to be Muslim and Americans who are Christian and Americans who are Jewish, all different, and Hindu, all different kinds of religions, of people who were murdered on 9/11 by Muslim extremists. But we can't apparently teach about that in the state of Virginia. And I have a sidebar on this that I think podcast listeners will appreciate. So I happen to live in Maryland, and I live in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C. And doesn't take that long to get to Northern Virginia, like, an hour and 10 minutes from my house. So an hour and 10-minute drive, straight 60 mile per hour drive. Eventually I'll be in Northern Virginia. And in Northern Virginia, there is an enormous Muslim population. Enormous. And I have no doubt in my mind that it is that population that this idiot in the Virginia Department of Education, that she's trying to basically not offend that population. And it misses the point. 9/11 happened. It happened because of Muslim extremism. People that hated America from outside our country. They don't believe in our way of life. They don't believe in Western culture. They don't believe in Christianity. They don't believe in the Judeo-Christian foundations of our country. They don't believe in the fact that women should have equality with men in the workplace and elsewhere. They don't believe any of these things. And as a result, they attacked our country because they would rather remake the country and make it look a lot like the Taliban. And yet, in real time, we have this stuff going on in Afghanistan with the Taliban, and we see how awful they are in real time. And now where they're being told in Virginia, no, you can't teach about this because we have this massive Muslim population in Northern Virginia, and God forbid we don't want to offend them. I'm sorry. To hell with that population and offending them. This isn't about offending people. This is about teaching real history, teaching what happened. Even if what happened draws you to the conclusion that, well, gee, there was Muslim extremism, and isn't that really sad that that happened? How do we stop that from happening again? Well, I don't know. Maybe freedom of religion would be a start in the Middle East. I mean, how many countries can you count in the Middle East that actually allow you to freely and openly practice your religion? And if the answer is like one, which is Israel, then what about the rest of the countries? When you can't do that, and if you can't do that, if you can't actually practice your religion in those other countries freely as a Christian or as a Jew or as a Hindu, then and you risk actually being killed from that, from practicing your religion, then clearly there is only one way of thought. And if you have no diversity of thought, then the chances are you're going to have extremism. And yet the Virginia Department of Education doesn't even want to teach that, which is just remarkable to me. And as I said, it's solely being done, in my opinion, not just because of the wokeness and the stupidness of public education systems in so many parts of the country. By the way, not all of them. Some public education systems are terrific. Some aren't so good. And some are losing their minds, like the Virginia Department of Education. But in their case, as I said, I'm quite certain it's because of the enormous Muslim population in Northern Virginia that has transformed Northern Virginia. And by the way, transformed the state of Virginia as well, a state that was a red state and now is a purple state and probably pretty soon going to be a reliably blue state, because you have these individuals who have transformed it, but then only want to learn a certain way. We don't want to be told the truth. And isn't that kind of dangerous? Isn't that kind of like repeating history by not teaching people exactly how to learn from it? I mean, it's just incredible. So get this, podcast listeners. Twitter has officially banned Alex Berenson over his coronavirus tweets. That is correct. Alex Berenson, a brilliant, absolutely brilliant writer, who's on the left, by the way, not the right, has been permanently banned because Alex Berenson tweets about coronavirus. So here's what the article says. Twitter has permanently suspended former New York Times journalist and author Alex Berenson, a critic of coronavirus lockdowns and coronavirus mandates. Twitter has banned him from their platform permanently. Quote, the account you referenced has been permanently suspended for repeated violations of our COVID-19 misinformation rules, a Twitter spokesman told Fox News in response to an inquiry Saturday night. On his Substack page, Berenson subsequently posted a brief message, just over 152 characters, titled, Goodbye, Twitter. Quote, this was the tweet that did it, he wrote, above a screenshot of his account before it was taken down. Entirely accurate. I can't wait to hear what a jury will make of this. In that tweet, Berenson wrote that the coronavirus vaccine does not stop infection or transmission. Quote, don't think of it, and here's what Berenson wrote in his tweet. Quote, don't think of it as a vaccine, he continued. Think of it, at best, as a therapeutic with a limited window of efficacy and terrible side effect profile that must be dosed in advance of illness. The Centers of Disease Control and Prevention say that COVID-19 vaccines are, quote, safe and effective following tens of thousands of clinical trials, and that side effects are rare. Berenson, 48, made national headlines last year for his criticism coronavirus lockdowns and mandates, drawing the ire of big tech, the mainstream media, and others who sought to bury everything that he wrote. In a December op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, Berenson warned that the COVID-19 pandemic had ushered in a new age of censorship and suppression. Well, we proved it now with him being banned from Twitter. Quote, information has never been more plentiful or easier to distribute, yet we are sliding into a new age of censorship and suppression, encouraged by technology giants and traditional media companies. As someone who's been falsely characterized as a coronavirus denier, he wrote at the time, I have seen this crisis firsthand. At that time, he had just finished battling with Amazon over a dispute over his own self-published books. Quote, since June, Amazon has twice tried to suppress self-published booklets I have written about COVID-19 and the response to it, he continued. These booklets don't contain conspiracy theories. Like the scientists who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, I simply believe many measures to control the coronavirus have been damaging, counterproductive, and unsupported by science. Berenson worked at the New York Times from 1999 until 2010 before becoming a full-time novelist. He also published nonfiction, including a controversial 2019 book that argued against the legalization of marijuana. So Alex Berenson has been routinely publishing books. Amazon, self-publishing. Amazon tried to ban him from selling them on their platform. And then he has been tweeting and putting on social media facts about studies that are being done across the planet and facts and studies that are being done in university settings, as well as major hospitals, Johns Hopkins, so many others. And even though these are reliable studies, and even though he's reporting the side effects from potential vaccines and other things, even though he's doing all of this online, Twitter is like, no, you can't give people more information about this vaccine. We don't want you to provide more information because more information is not good. Since when? Since when is getting more information not good? And look, podcast listeners, that's why I'm calling this podcast Deliver Us from Evil, because I do believe that a darkness has descended upon our continent, and I believe it is evil. And Bill Maher talked about it at the beginning of this podcast. And you see the Virginia Department of Education that's saying, don't teach about evil. Don't teach about the evil that happened on 9/11. If there were ever a picture of evil, it would be what happened on 9/11 with the buildings collapsing and people willing to kill themselves in planes and everybody on the plane, passenger planes, as well as all of these civilians inside these buildings. And then Twitter, which doesn't want you to have information to make your own health decisions, bans Alex Berenson. I mean, there is a darkness that has descended upon this continent, and it is quite frightening, quite frightening. So get this, podcast listeners. We next up have the daily Biden dumpster fire. That's right. It's the daily Biden dumpster fire. So Joe Biden turns his back on a reporter who asks him about Afghanistan. Yes, that's right. We have this incredible story unfolding in Afghanistan. It's hard to watch. And you see the evil that exists in Afghanistan in real time, and you see that that evil is going to prevail. And the good, which is the United States of America, is going to leave. And the daily Biden dumpster fire covers Joe Biden, who just doesn't want to answer questions about Afghanistan. I mean, he's at FEMA, right? He's at FEMA because he's there to talk to the FEMA representatives and government officials about the storm that's going to hit Louisiana and Alabama. And while there, you would assume that an equally important story, an equally important and timely story would be Afghanistan, because after all, we have to be out of Afghanistan by tomorrow, because tomorrow's the last day of August. And so a reporter asks him the question, and we have that clip. Almost unbelievable. And here it is.
Commissioner, I really think it all works. I'm not supposed to take any questions, but go ahead.
Mr. President, on Afghanistan.
I'm not going to answer Afghanistan now.
Can you say if there's still an acute
Okay.
risk?
Okay, so there is President Biden there at FEMA headquarters in D.C.
Yeah, so there's Joe Biden at FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C., talking about the storm that's going to hit Louisiana. And I don't want the podcast listeners to think that we don't think storms are important, because they are important. But I think of equal importance, maybe greater importance. Yeah, I think so. Probably greater importance is what's happening in Afghanistan. And he's like, I don't want to answer any questions about Afghanistan. Why would I want to do that? I'm only president of the United States. I'm here at FEMA, And where the hell is Kamala Harris? Really, where is she? I mean, where has she been? Why can't we ask her about Afghanistan? Because it's pretty clear that she's probably going to be president pretty soon, because good old Joe is losing his mind. I mean, she needs to know something about international affairs. I mean, when she's not stoned, at least. I mean, this is part of that California cancel culture. I mean, doesn't want to talk about that. So she's going to try to cancel what? Cancel the journalist, because she doesn't want to answer any questions. So unbelievable. But that is our daily Biden dumpster fire. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. That's right. Go Woke or Go Broke. This segment is a Stanford professor, as in Stanford University in California. He blames whiteness for his opposition. He blames whiteness for there even being opposition to the Stanford school mask mandates. He says, quote, white people are GOP. So a Stanford professor blames whiteness for opposition to Stanford University's mask mandate. And so here's the article. You gotta listen to this. This is just incredible. A Stanford University professor, by the way, Stanford University costs a fortune to go to, and it's highly selective, right? It's only America's elite that get to go there. And imagine going to a university where a professor actually says this, and he's supposed to be teaching you about critical thinking skills. Remember, critical thinking skills are those skills that you learn in college that teach you how to think in a way that is critical, so that you never really accept what any argument is, but you listen to all the arguments together and read them and sift through them, at which point you come to a truth. So a critical thinker listens to all sides and then comes to a truth. Well, this guy is like, oh no, there's only one truth. And my truth is, since I'm the professor, that it's the white people that don't want to wear masks. So a Stanford University professor went on a Twitter tirade targeting those who oppose the school's mask mandates, saying that people's whiteness makes them believe they are above government action. Make no mistake, this crazy opposition to mask wearing that is leading folks, read white people, to act violently at school board meetings and council meetings and everywhere else. Yeah, you can't disconnect it from whiteness. And discussions that don't acknowledge this are incomplete, said Stanford University political science professor Hakeem Jefferson on Twitter. Jefferson, whose Twitter bio states, race is the central organizing feature of American politics. So this professor, whose Twitter bio states, quote, race is the central organizing feature of American politics, argued that while masks are uncomfortable for all people, it is only white people who believe they are above government action. Quote, ain't like masks are comfortable for non-white people, but you don't see a bunch of black folks storming meetings, Jefferson said, And it's not just because these white folks are GOP. It's because they're white and believe whiteness confers upon them a kind of power that places them above government action. Jefferson also blamed whiteness for the January 6th Capitol riot, claiming that it was race that was driving that behavior. It's like my reaction to January 6th, Jefferson said. You don't have to be an expert in identity to know that whiteness is driving the behavior. The crowds are overwhelmingly white. You think this just randomly happened? Nah, whiteness be working overtime. Like we say in the South, the devil is busy. Jefferson later tweeted about a student who questioned his belief that whiteness was behind the January 6th riot, with the student noting that other racial groups were present at the rally. So a student, I'm not sure if you caught that, podcast listeners, a student of this professor's questioned the professor that whiteness was behind the January 6th riot. The student was like, I don't think that's so, because there were all kinds of racial groups that were present at the rally. And the professor responded by saying that whiteness wasn't only about skin color, instead arguing that whiteness is an ideology. I'm sorry. Pull your children out of Stanford right now. Or certainly pull them out of this class. Don't, just give this professor no students. Don't waste your time. He's an idiot. He's a racist, obviously, because he judges people by the way they look. He doesn't believe in diversity of thought. Obviously, we can clearly see that from his comments. But I just think it's interesting. Another comment that he made, I just want to talk about that very briefly, this professor. And that comment is, he said that white people think that they are above government action. And I really think that this is why we have so many professors. This is exemplary of so many professors who don't understand America's founding and America's Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's actually uniquely American to question the government. It is uniquely American to oppose government action and to disagree with what the government is doing. It is uniquely American to say that I want to see all of the data and all of the science, and I want to see it without politics involved before I decide whether I'm going to wear a mask or whether I want to get a third vaccine shot, or I want to argue with the government about its spending and believe that it's inflationary and it's going to destroy the country and it's going to devalue the dollar. I mean, we're allowed, of course, to disagree with the government. It's what makes us Americans. It is unique to our Constitution and to our Bill of Rights. And yet this professor is like, well, the only people that question the government are people that are white. I mean, what an idiot on so many planes, right? I mean, he's an idiot because it's not true. He's an idiot because it's uniquely American to criticize the government. And he's an idiot because he only sees people based on the way they look. And then he's an idiot because he says that whiteness is not the way you look. It's an ideology. So way to go, Stanford, for really, hiring the best and the brightest to teach the children. I mean, it's really all about the children, of course. So next up, podcast listeners, a judge strips a mother of her parental rights over vaccine status. That's right. A judge in Cook County, which is Chicago, Illinois, strips a mother of her parental rights because she is not vaccinated. You heard that correctly. So in Chicago, a mother said a Cook County judge, and this is true, by the way, it's been verified, has taken away her parental rights after learning that she is not vaccinated against COVID-19. And what all parties agree is a very unusual and perhaps unprecedented step. A judge at Chicago's Daly Center has stripped Rebecca Furlett of custody because she refuses to get a vaccine shot. Quote, I miss my son more than anything. It's been very difficult. I haven't seen him since August the 10th, Furlett told Fox 32 News in an exclusive interview. That's the day Furlet appeared in court via Zoom along with her ex-husband for a child support hearing involving their 11-year-old son. So Furlet is the mom, and her ex-husband go to court because they're arguing over child support. They're not arguing over child custody. They're arguing over child support, like who's paying for the child to, get to school, and who's paying for the child's food, and I said schools, so that's education, who's paying for the child's health care, all that stuff, right? Because you both made the child, you both have to participate in paying to raise the child, even if you're sharing custody, or even if one parent has full custody. So the two parents have been divorced for 7 years, and they actually share custody and parenting time already. So they share custody and they share parenting time, but they're arguing over who pays for what. This is very common in divorce cases. It's just like, it never ends, I've known plenty of people that have gotten divorced, and that is very accurate. It's like, as soon as you have children in a marriage, you're really never divorced, because you're going to be living out and reliving that divorce throughout the rest of your life, because you are not just raising the child, but one day the child goes to college and you want to go to the college graduation. And every time you see your ex, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they're there. Well, of course, they helped make the child. And then your child gets married and you're both there too. And then maybe both parents have been remarried. I mean, this is a problem, right? This is why you should really think carefully before you get married and have children, and really, know who you're dating and know who you're marrying. Nonetheless, back to the story. Furlet says, out of the blue, during the court hearing, Cook County Judge James Shapiro asked whether she had been vaccinated. Okay, now they're there for child support. That's what they're arguing over, money. And the judge, James Shapiro, said, well, Mrs. Furlet, have you been vaccinated? And so Furlet told Shapiro she had not been vaccinated because she has had many bad reactions to vaccines in the past. And that is why. So Shapiro then ordered that Furlet be stripped of all of her parental time and parental rights with her son until such time as she gets vaccinated. So what does that have to do with money, right? You're arguing over money, and the judge's like, I don't want to talk about the money thing. I want to talk about the vaccination thing. Miss, are you vaccinated? Because if you're not vaccinated, then you can't ever see your son again. So over the past 2 weeks, Furlet has been able to talk to her son on the phone and through video calls, but has not seen him in person. Quote, I think it's wrong. I think that it's dividing families, and I think it's not in my son's best interest to be away from his mother, Furlet said. Clearly she's right. Furlet is now appealing the court order, saying the judge has no business taking away her parental rights simply because she's not vaccinated. Quote, it had nothing to do with what we're talking about. He was placing his views on me and taking my son away from me, Furlet said. Annette Fernholz, Furlet's attorney, says the judge has overstepped his authority. Well, duh. Quote, in this case, you have a judge without any matter before him regarding the parental time with the child deciding. So once again, in this case, you have a judge without any matter before him regarding parenting time, and with the child deciding, oh, you're not vaccinated, you don't get to see your child at all until you are vaccinated. That kind of exceeds his jurisdiction. That's what the attorney for Furlet said. You have to understand, the father did not even bring this issue before the court. Like, the father didn't even say, hey, look, the reason I'm not paying her more is because she's not vaccinated. The father didn't bring up vaccination status at all. So it wasn't an issue in the arguments in the court. So the judge, on his very own, and making this decision about the vaccination, I mean, he just did it all on his own. It's unbelievable. I feel as though that across America, and I said this at the beginning of the podcast and also in the middle, that there is a dark cloak descending upon our continent, and it is the cloak of evil, and that we need to deliver ourselves from evil, just as we are delivering so many Afghanis, certainly not all, and we tried for 20 years, but so many Afghanistanis from evil. We need to also deliver ourselves from evil, and that is the evil of cancel culture and of America haters and people who don't believe our country is exceptional. We need to deliver ourselves from evil of judges who believe that you don't have the right to make your own healthcare decisions. And if you ever want to see what Obamacare fully implemented to the nth degree, which is socialized medicine, where the government decides what you get to do and get to take, this is what it looks like. Government telling you you have to do things to your health, regardless of whether it is good for you or not. There's this evil that has descended upon our continent, and we have got to fight back. We have got to fight back. We've got to take back our country. We have to start teaching about American exceptionalism because we are seeing it in real time in Afghanistan. And we are a wonderful country. And because of that, people want to come here. That's why mothers are handing their infant children and their toddlers to American GIs. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.